Welcome back. You're watching Hard Copy on Channels Television. Our guest is Dr. Joe Abba, the Director General of the Bureau of Public Service Reforms, who's still with us in the studio. Now, quickly, you were talking about how you were clarifying that the Constitution is not the enemy. Was that what you're trying to say?
The Constitution is not the enemy, but when you talk about the cost of governance, there are certain constitutional provisions that by their inherent nature increases the cost of governance beyond what you can realistically manage. That is the enemy, not the Constitution. Let's
talk about federal character, even though some people will say that you already implied that the Constitution might be the enemy with that statement. But let's talk about...
It will sound more interesting to say that, but that's not what I'm saying.
Okay. Let's talk about federal character. Now, it's one term that elicits different reactions from different people. Do you think it's a let or a hindrance?
I think that in a multicultural, multi-ethnic society like Nigeria, you need some sort of a tool to help with social cohesion. I think you do, and so the problem is not so much the federal character as the misapplication of it. Having said that, I believe that there are certain core functions that should be based purely on merit. People give an example that if you were in a hospital having surgery, you wouldn't care where the person came from. You'd be looking for the best surgeon to carry out the procedure. Yes.
So what's the Bureau, is the Bureau doing anything to push those positions it believes should be on merit forward?
I think what we're doing is working with a number of different organizations, a number of different ministries. So as an example, we did some work with the Niger Delta Development Commission some time ago. And although we recognize Mr. President's complete authority to appoint and, the practice of governors nominating people from their states, what we did was actually to set out person specifications in our report to say, yes, you can choose anybody you like, but make sure that they meet this criteria, both for the managing director and for the board members. So that's the kind of work we do. Nobody can interfere with Mr. President's constitutional authority to appoint. What we can do is to say, okay, if you're appointing into this position, please look for these skills and attributes. And that's what we've done in the NDDC and in a few other places.
It's one thing for you to do that and nothing for it to be followed. Has it been followed?
The one for NDDC was not followed in the last board and management before this one. I think this one, yes, it has been. And that's the way our work goes. Our work is highly political. It's highly dependent on others. We don't have the power to arrest anybody for not complying with what we recommend. What we do is to recommend, justify, explain why we're making those recommendations, and if you like, win hearts and minds. That's what we try to do.
Well, I'm going to cite quickly to you one of your articles which I read, titled "Those Useless Civil Servants," which is one term that a lot of Nigerians use a lot. Now, you extensively cite the political scientist Peter Eke, who wrote "Colonialism and the Two Publics in Africa," whom you agree with. Is that right? On his theory of the two publics, or is it the two publics?
I think he has great explanatory power about the dialectics in the minds of the average post-colonial public servant. Yes.
For the purpose of our viewers, I'm going to read quickly just a summary of what the publics are, according to the scientist Peter Eke. Now, he says that there is a primordial public, which you say that is usually at his village or tribe level, which is just moral and just and communal. And then there's a civic public, beg your pardon, such as the civil service, the public service, and the entire machinery of government at federal, state, and local government levels. Now, what I find disturbing about this work was that Mr. Eke, I don't know if he was a professor or a doctor, yes. Professor Eke wrote this article in 1975, very much like, Chinua Achebe's The Problem with Nigeria, which was written in 1983. But then over 40 years after, this is still explaining the issues that we face today, do we really have the will to tackle these issues? Are we just going round in circles?
We're not going around in circles, no. We're making progress. That progress can be slow sometimes, and it can be inconsistent. But overall, as a trajectory, we are making progress. Don't forget that despite the dysfunctionality of our system, the way we tackled Ebola has been held up as an example of good practice around the world. We've eliminated guinea worm. We've reduced the prevalence of HIV/AIDS by 40%. Our banks are much stronger. There was a period when our aircraft was falling out of the sky every 6 months. So it's very easy to be dissatisfied at the current state of things, and that is absolutely fine. We should demand better all the time, but at the same time, we shouldn't lose sight of some of the improvements which we simply take for granted.
For some people, they will interpret you as being overly optimistic, because when you look at the security...
You need optimism to do my job.
Perhaps, but then when it's too much, some people will say it's not being realistic.
True.
Cautious optimism, perhaps. But then, when people look at, for instance, the security situation in the land, where, there is sometimes fighting. In many instances, people are killed, and in most instances, they criticize government for not being decisive enough, or sometimes, ethnic or religious interpretations are given to this crisis, and sometimes they're led to fester. Look at what we saw in the Northeast, for instance, what we're seeing in Southern Kaduna, for instance. They are not very optimistic. They believe that we're not addressing the core foundations of, addressing our unity as a people, addressing the core essence of Nigeria. That's on the one hand. On the second hand, they also believe that these issues we're glossing over them. Do you agree with them?
No, I don't believe so at all. I don't believe we're glossing over any issues at all. And this is not about over optimism. It's about informed optimism, and there's a difference between the two. I think people who don't have sufficient information are more likely to think that the whole world is coming to an end, everything is bad, nothing is being done, the public servants are just there taking money and doing nothing. Nothing is further from the truth. The business of governance is very, very, very difficult. At the best of times, you're faced with very, very difficult challenges and problems, none of which is easy. It doesn't matter which way to go.
You argue that the Asians overcame Peter Ake's two publics in the mind of their public servants by investing and nurturing their public service.
Yes.
Not by sacking everyone and destroying it. You said Nigeria can do the same. Now, my question is, why are we not doing the same? Because for a lot of people, they believe that should be the mandate of the Bureau of Public Service Reforms. It
is the mandate of the Bureau of Public Service Reforms, and it is exactly what we've been working on, and we keep working on. However, things are difficult, and we need to understand the feelings of Nigerians. We've talked there about the need to invest in our public services. Nigerians will argue quite rightly that the public service is spending an inordinate amount of a percentage of the federal budget. And so when I talk about investing in the public service, people think, okay, what about the rest of us? The public service is already consuming too much. And so that's why we need to focus on increasing our production. Because if you look at the arguments around recurrent expenditure, if you take this complex, the channels complex, for instance. People say, oh, when is recurrent expenditure going to come down? I can bet you that your recurrent expenditure in this building has not come down from last year. If you think about increases in cost of electricity, cost of diesel, maybe salary increases, and all of these things. And so there's a minimum with which you need to run a decent organization. There's a minimum you need.
Dr. Joe Abba, thank you so much for coming on Hard Copy.
Thanks, Mope.
Well, that's the program today. Tweets and mails are welcome to the address on your screen. Thank you for watching. I'm Maokwe Ogun. See you next week.